Okay, so let's get rolling. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Scaling Facebook Ads for Success, the two-lesson training program. And this will be the first lesson, session one, Scaling Fundamentals. Um, Thank you so much for signing up. This is a hotly requested topic. So, as you probably know, I've been running these training programs for a few years now. And every once in a while, I'll reach out and ask people, what topics would you like me to cover? And scaling is one that's always at the top of the list. It just confuses people and frustrates people. And, uh, it's one I knew I needed to cover at some point, but not one I was really personally excited to. I didn't have the content for it. And Andrew, my friend Andrew Foxwell, did. So those of you who haven't been on training with Andrew in the past, he did Facebook Analytics for me last year, also conducted a training program on Business Manager. He's one of my good friends, a fellow Wisconsin nerd. And if you've ever listened to the pubcast, he's often my guest there too. So I'm really excited to have him on. Andrew, are you there?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Super glad to be here. Really excited. I had to make sure the mic wasn't too loud there because notice it says scaling fundamentals, right? So we're
No.
talking about here. This is
Yeah.
this is my
It's kind of nerdy stuff you can look forward to now. So
that's right. That's right.
yeah, Andrew, go ahead. You can take over from here.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Super glad to have you here and very grateful that you are here with me as well. Just wanted to say, first of all, as John said, this is a hotly requested thing, and we'll get into that as we go over time. So, why now, right? John and I have been asked about this. How do I scale? For a lot of time. John and I do the coaching program, or we do coaching, one-on-one coaching, and we've done other coaching programs. I've done in-person coaching, and this is a common question that I hear in many communities. So that's why. And the other thing that I think is important is I have seen what I would classify as misinformation. There's a lot of information out there about scaling for people that are really spending a lot. But there's not necessarily information about scaling necessarily for those of us that are seeing some decent success, but want to kind of spend more and aren't really sure what to do next, right? So this training will apply to both of those communities, absolutely. But it does help in this first section initially to talk about basically the, people, for those of us that are learning to scale and what that even means. So who is this for, right? This is for those of you that would like to successfully scale and become more profitable. It's for those of you that are on the call, agencies, consultants, in-house marketers, and if you're advertising, this masterclass is for you. This presentation and these two training classes are centering a lot on e-commerce because that's where scale comes from in e-commerce, but it's also it'll help you with scaling lead gen, it'll help you with scaling B2B. So the fundamentals apply definitely. In the second section, there's some more discussion on e-commerce, but still helpful for you to know in that overall skill set. So first of all, who am I? In case you're curious, this is about me. Foxwell Digital is a company that I own with my wife, Gracie, and our golden doodle, Wingra. I've managed Facebook ads for quite a long time. This is what I've been doing pretty much my whole professional career. I did the business manager and analytics classes. I've been on John's Pubcase for 2 years, a little typo there, co-host of the e-commerce influence podcast as well. And I've been quoted in different places, and I do love Green Bay Packers and Antiques Roadshow, to be really honest with you, which is just a really nerdy show about antiques on public broadcasting in the United States. A lot of you joining us from all over the world, so thank you to those of you that are joining us. So as we go through this, one of the things that I do want to point out is if there's anything that you're wanting to talk more about or you're curious about, feel free to always contact me, and that's where I get a lot of great fuel. So here's some brands that I've helped scale, if you've heard of any of these. This is something that I've done a lot of. I've probably hosted and had, 200 plus coaching calls on this over the last 3 to 4 years that have touched at least to some degree on scaling. And I really try to also take pride in kind of learning what other people are doing, as I said. So this scaling and how to scale correctly evolves over time. So it's something that I am always learning. And when I'm working with people like you that are on the call, there's many ways to do different things. So if there's feedback that you have, please always let me know. So how will these work? It's going to be about 45 to 60 minutes plus a Q&A. So there'll be a Q&A at the end. You'll get the presentation slides, you'll get some homework, and make sure that you're asking a lot of those questions. And yes, there'll be a recording. Please allow 24 hours for it to be ready, and it'll be emailed to you. So this is what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over horizontal vertical scaling, industry advice, common problems, learning phase, and many other pieces around account structure and naming conventions, etc. So this is where I just want to mention what I call the MCA, the major caveat alert. So the thing that I want to mention here before we even get started is I've already been hinting at this, which is I think there's a reason, and from what I've seen and I've watched and listened to as many training programs as I possibly can and listened to podcasts as much as I can on scaling, even though I've been doing this a long time. And one part of my business is I actually work with a lot of ad agencies and e-commerce agencies and doing direct response and learning about what they're doing for scale. So that's a big part of what I do, but I wanted to inform myself, and there isn't really a scaling training that's out there that is this in-depth. It's something that I just wanted to point out to you that I think there's a reason it hasn't been created yet, because it's hard to put a stake in the ground at any given time when you talk about scaling, right? It's hard to say, this is what's working, because it could not work the next day, or it could be different. So what we're going to translate to you is there are some specific tactics, and these are proven tactics that I have used over the years and others have used over the years. But what we're going to do is focus as much as we can on some themes that hopefully you will take away from this training program as well. So my major caveat alert is one, this is a tough topic. So if there are questions, as I said, please always let me know. If you're in a Power Hitters Club and you have questions, feel free to post them on the thread. And if you also have seen something else, you may have scaled and you may see something differently, please let me know, because that's something that we will learn from. So that's my major caveat alert, just wanting to let you know. As I designed this as well, I went through and realized that I wanted to provide a narrative that was a checklist to some degree, right? These are things that it's going to be within the link that John sends you with the download. And so these are ideas for you as you scale. And there's basically, I've broken it up into 4 phases. This is showing phase 1 and 2, but you'll have this. It's a PDF. It's not something that's absolutely you have to do every single one of them, but you can try them and you can see what they're like. And we'll talk about a number of these pieces, but we'll talk about actually everything in this checklist. But it's important for you to understand that that's there for you, because I wanted to provide as much value as possible. So we'll talk about how to sustainably scale. We'll talk about debunking some myths, learning how to avoid common mistakes, and deciphering that learning phase. We're going to go through some financial calculations as well, and then setting up your account the right way and naming conventions and kind of laying that proper foundation. So a few assumptions really quick. You have a baseline knowledge. I'm going to get fairly nerdy fairly quickly using language that's familiar in the vernacular within the Facebook ad industry. So if you have questions, feel free to let us know at the end. But assuming that I'm going to assume that most of you have kind of an idea. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here for scaling. And on the disclaimer for international, for those of you that are tuning in from around the world, because of the way that audience sizes are created in some different countries, we can't guarantee that every single one of these is going to be a tactic exactly it's going to work in your country. But pretty much, I just wanted to throw it out there that sometimes things behave a little bit differently internationally, which you're probably used to advertising in that country anyway. So here we go on scaling overview. So what really do we mean by scaling, right? Scaling allows you to grow your Facebook ad account using sustainable practices so you can spend more, more over a period of time while seeing the same or greater ROI. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about growing your account. We're talking about making sure that you can spend more and you can see the same return on investment that you are seeing or the same cost per lead that you are seeing. Scaling the right way allows you to use multiple ad units and ad types to grow your brand in all parts of the funnel. And really, when I say scaling, what I'm talking about too is also close monitoring and optimization, but it also can mean more predictable success. So hopefully, as you scale, you start to see more predictability within the account, which is a sign that you are scaling correctly, that there is to some degree predictability around that because Facebook will help deliver it in a more predictable way. Common challenges with scaling. There's a lot of things that John and I have heard over the years on common challenges, and I'm sure no doubt you've run into some of the most common, right? Audiences are burning out. So you're running ads at those audiences and they stop working. The audience itself has been running for a while. I talked to somebody yesterday, their ads were running on this one audience since October, and it just stopped working in the last 2 weeks. It just hasn't been performing, and the return on ad spend has been going down. So that's a common issue. Increasing budgets too quickly, causing costs to rise. So this is something I myself am guilty of. And I should say before I continue, many of these learnings actually are issues that I have also made the mistake of myself. So this is not like I am some perfect person of doing this. Far from it. This is like I've done this. So increasing the budget too quickly, you see a good results on something and you double the ad set budget over a certain period of time. Common challenge, not enough creative. So you start to scale, you start to increase, and you don't have the ad copy or the ad creative, video, photo, whatever it is, to continue to scale. And you're not monitoring it enough. That's another challenge. And then the frequency is being too high. You're showing the same ad to the same group of people over and expecting those results to scale as things go up, as the budgets go up. So those are some of the common challenges. Let's talk about that audience burnout scenario. This is one I want to address right away because it's something, as I said, that's incredibly common. So my 1% lookalikes and my best customers are performing well, but as I increase that budget, they decrease in efficiency. Why does this happen? This question itself probably represents, to me, at least 50% of the questioning that you get on this topic. And it's because of the objective-based advertising within the ad algorithm. It finds the best converters first, right? Some of you have no doubt heard some advice about the algorithm bucketing users into different places, converters, engagers, and clickers. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? It's finding people that are likely to convert first if that's what you're trying to do. So the solution to this is generally what's called horizontal scaling, which we're going to talk about today, and is one of my favorite topics, to be totally honest with you. But I'm a nerd, so it happens. So essentially what you're looking at when you're talking about this is, you have to understand they're looking at your bid. This is from Facebook, this graph. You're looking at the estimated action rate. So what's the likelihood that showing that impression will lead to your desired result? And then you add in the user value. So how interested do you think this person is going to be by this? And that's the total value. So as you advertise more to these people, these numbers go down, and I'll give a little really technical graph here that I created for this topic. But basically, if you look on the top, Facebook finds the best group that's more likely to take the action you want first. Okay, so this is why when you launch a 1% lookalike or an interest-based audience, and it does really well for, let's say, 2 weeks, sometimes 3 months, it's doing well, it's doing great, and it's hitting that audience. And as you increase, as you increase the budget, Facebook is showing that ad to more people within the same grouping. And the more the bigger that group gets, though, right? It's increasing the budget. Facebook is having to show it to more people, and the less likely those people are that they're your perfect people, which is going to then increase the CPA or the cost per lead or whatever you're looking for. So this is a common issue, and we're going to talk a lot about this, and this is a framework definitely, but this is part of the reason why. This is why you have to have a lot of things running, and this is why horizontal scaling is a good one, because it's running on the same thing. John, anything to say about this?
I mean, it's good. I think you definitely touched on a lot of the same ways I explained this. I mean, basically, you look at it like this: you've got an audience of 100,000 people, and Facebook thinks that we'll say 1,000 of those people are most likely to convert, and you're spending at a low budget, and maybe you've gotten 500 of those people to convert, so you raise the budget. Well, first of all, those 500 people are now no longer going to be targeted, or hopefully you're not targeting them because they already converted. But then they have to kind of expand the net a little bit to people a little bit less likely to convert. So that hurts your conversion. But additionally, when you run things for a significant amount of time, it starts accumulating, of course, negative feedback, especially as you start showing your ads to people who are less and less likely to convert, which is what's happening as you raise the budget. So those are all things that I consider when I explain this to people.
Yeah, I think the negative feedback piece is really important. And this is basically kind of what I'm talking about. Most commonly, what I'll see is lookalikes for 1%, which is the most common lookalike in many cases. They'll wear out around $2,500 US worth of spend. I mean, this is a range. I've seen them wear out at $1,000. And it really depends on sort of the quality of the core list that you're creating the lookalike from. And it can happen sooner or later. I've seen people spend $20,000 through a lookalike for 1% and it not be a problem, and then it'll start to decline. But it's really something you want to be careful of. So it goes kind of that. Think about it in phases, right? Phase one, it's finding those most relevant people, and as a relevant score, CTR, negative feedback, as John said, engagement, other signals. By the way, I'm definitely thinking about writing a book called Signals, which is about the Facebook ad auction, because it's all what it boils down to. And as those things decline, Facebook begins to show it to the second tier audience, slightly less relevant audience based on objective. And then as phase 3 and phase 4 go on, it's finding more of those that are those more people as you scale, but they're less relevant. So that's kind of a common issue that you have. So another thing that you'll see with this in many cases, if it's decreasing in performance, you'll notice that, again, those ad sets have been set and forget, right? You set it up, you haven't changed it. There hasn't been a modification there. And, there's sort of a fine line between changing it too much, and we'll talk about the learning phase later on, and changing it enough. But, it's been set and forget. You haven't done anything with it. The creative hasn't been changed. There hasn't been daily monitoring to just kind of see what's happening, and increasing the budget too quickly without waiting. So this is a common thing that you'll see. So as you spend more, the process happens a lot faster. A few solutions, of course, on this that we will talk about as this course goes on: changing up the creative, duplicating the ad set, starting it over again at a lower budget, re-entering it into the auction. We'll talk about that in part 2 on Thursday together. Increase the size of that lookalike, maybe try a more relevant lookalike instead of add to cart lookalike, try a purchase or something like that. So these are just a few quick ideas that you have that if you listened to only the first 20 minutes of this presentation, you have hopefully enough value of, oh, that's interesting, that's something I can try. The second thing that I will see as common is, the creative gap scenario, right? My ads are overall 2x on return on ad spend, but as I've scaled, my performance declines and the frequencies get higher. This is definitely the same thing we just talked about on the audiences. And generally, though, another thing to look at is that creative gap, which is that you need enough creative and advertisements with multiple pitches and hooks to keep the user engaged, right? If someone has seen an ad 3 times, if your frequency is at a 3, right, and you're scaling up and your frequencies are going up, especially on lower funnel audiences, and they haven't bought, are they really going to buy after 3 or 4 times? Probably not, right? Now, I have also seen people who said, hey, I've had 5 frequency and people are still buying. If that's the case, then that's surprising, frankly, because it doesn't usually happen that way. But this is something to point out in terms of around that creative wearing out. So you really can't keep recycling the same creative in different parts of the funnel and expect the same results. There's occasionally times where you can run something, let's say seasonally. So you run it in August and you're running it from August to October, and then you run it the same ads in, let's say, August to October the next year on prospecting audiences, right? Brand new people. That's something that could potentially work. But many times you can't keep the same thing running without changing it, right? So anytime I see that frequency of 3 or higher and your results are declining over a 48-hour period, it's probably the creative and the audience are both, right? So this is a signal that I'm looking for to know as I'm scaling to kind of be watching out. So we'll be talking more about multi-tiered messaging in the next little bit. A third one is audience and objective creativity lacking. So this is a very common thing. In many cases, you'll have a ad set system running, or let's say the Facebook ads profitability system running, of 1% lookalikes to dynamic product ads. So their 1% lookalikes are running to your website, and then you have let's say you have a website custom audience 30-day remarketing, or a dynamic product ad remarketing. And they'll run well. This system, you're running people to your site and then remarketing to them, will be okay for a little while, but then it just sort of stops working over time, right? That system doesn't last forever. And the reason is that you're not testing all types of audiences in ads and sort of demographics, interests, broad match, dynamic product ads. There's not any sort of new fuel into it. So I'll see, it's sort of a combination of the previous things that we've talked about, where you have to have more kind of audience and objective creativity as it goes into this. And we'll talk about multi-tiered messaging. So common steps to success I see, and there are exceptions to this, of course, but the most common things I'll see is when I look at accounts that are monitoring. I was talking to prepare for this to I think there was about 5 or 6 conversations I had to brands that were spending north of $100,000 a month. And the things that they're doing is vigilant monitoring, right? So they're updating, they're doing it with automated rules. They'll do wider audiences. So they're using much bigger audiences because their data is there for Facebook to support it. The creative is being refreshed in many cases in all parts of the funnel, and kind of in a once every other week type of thing, especially in the lower funnel. And even changing copy on dynamic ads is a common one. So that's kind of the refresh. And the dynamic ad and remarketing program, very complex in many cases. So you'll have things like an ad for running to people that have engaged, that watched a video or engaged with the Facebook page. And then you'll also have something like the people that have visited in the last 14 days, in the last 7 days, in the last 3 days, 1 day, right? So opening up different windows using remarketing and a lot of experimentation. The people that I've seen that have had success with scaling really never stop hustling on that experimenting, is that's really what it requires. And the other one that's common is that there's more room in the acceptable CPA or cost per lead. Those people that I've seen that have grown significantly, they are in the place where their cost per, sort of acquisition or average order value is, north of, let's say, $60 US. Now, does it mean that if you have a product or a lead cost that's lower than that you can scale? No, not at all. But it does help if there's more room there, because as you scale, you will have to sort of stomach some higher CPAs in many cases to learn, because that's really what Facebook is doing. But that's not the rule by any means. So the biggest scaling misconception, I think, is that if I spend more money, my ads will bring me more money or more leads, right? And if you have to kind of take into account that even if you increase the budget, the algorithm is still at work. So you're showing ads to real people, right? So just because you increase the budget doesn't mean that there's that increased percentage of people that want to buy from you. And this is a concept that I credit to folks at Digital Marketer for, putting the stake in the ground on this. And that's something that to me has been definitely inspiring as well. So let's talk about horizontal versus vertical scaling. So vertical scaling is increasing the budget, right? So vertical scaling is just turning up the ad set budget, and that's all that you're doing. Now, as a proponent of vertical scaling, I like vertical scaling. It's definitely part of the equation, right? Increasing budgets, of course, you have to do at the ad set level. However, it can't be the only thing that you do. So horizontal scaling is more audiences, more offers within the funnel to attract people at different parts, more objectives. So not just conversion, page post engagement, video view, leads, sort of generally more of everything else other than increasing it, and doing a lot of different pitches to try to find people. So if you only increase the budget, you're cutting yourself short by only giving the story one ending, right? So this is a very important concept that will help us the rest of our time together talking about horizontal versus vertical. So if you're only using, let's say, one type of offer if you're an e-commerce advertiser and you're saying, hey, I'm going to offer 15% off, you're only speaking to one type of a person. So some people might say, hey, 15% off sounds pretty good to me. To other people, a buy one, get one might be interesting. To other people, content might be interesting, right? To other people, they may want to hear, those of us that are Facebook advertisers, I mean, we're a little bit more skeptical and discerning buyers, I would like to think, because we do this for a living. And, we may say, oh, that's interesting. They have an article that says, why we're great or whatever, and you want to learn about it. So if you're only using one type of offer within the funnel, you're only speaking to one type of person. So consider the myriad of differences in speaking to those different personas. Not everyone's going to be enticed by the same thing. So it's important to mention different, and we're motivated by different things and different benefits and solutions, right? Of course, there's always a caveat, and I want to talk about my friends at Blenders Eyewear, who I love dearly. These guys have been using Get 15 as the 15% off offer on everything for a really long time, right? So in some cases, if your creative is stunning, it's thumb stopping, your price point's under $40 or $50, right? It's something that people would buy quickly. You're able to utilize a quick offer that you can use across the funnel. And it constantly brings people in. And if you haven't done this, or you kind of are in that phase in your e-commerce, and you want to try this is an interesting thing. You could try it in all parts of the funnel, and that may work. But it's not something that I recommend initially, right? Kind of bringing people in and pitch them in a different way. I think this really works because the product has a mass market appeal and the price point is accessible in many cases. So really, above all, wrapping this up, horizontal scaling is about better understanding your audience in all parts of the funnel more effectively. The scale is unlimited here, really, because you're working hard on the pitch and the way, and you're discussing what you sell with potential customers. So that's really important. So consider how you personally shop and browse. Horizontal scaling makes a lot of sense, right? You get, let's say you look at a thing, then let's say you go to the website and you're kind of checking it out, and you sign up for their email, and then you get the email, and then you think about it, and then maybe you follow them on Instagram. So you see where I'm going with this, right? Utilizing multiple different pieces as time goes on. Mr. Loomer, do you have any comments on horizontal versus vertical scaling?
No, I mean, I think this is certainly related, at least to a point, to a lot of the experiments I've run, and kind of that evergreen concept of like showing different content to somebody over time, so even if you have an audience of in some of these cases like 1,000 people, but I'm going to try to show it to everybody within that audience. I'm going to see one thing over 4 days and something else over 4 days and something else over 4 days, and kind of giving them different angles every day. So I think similar concept there. Main thing being that you're always experimenting and trying something different, as opposed to I'm going to run with one approach, one objective, one ad unit, one piece of creative and copy, and that should keep working, right? So,
Right.
Yeah, that's the main thing. And first of all, there's a bunch of questions coming in, and everyone should know that. And I'm not sure if we were clear on that or at the beginning or not. We will answer as many, if not all of them, at the end. But a couple of them did come up. They're kind of related to some things that we might want to kind of clarify. Because I get questions a lot regarding what you consider a good frequency. So can you expand on that?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, frequency really to me is if you're in that 3 to 4, then I think it's time to look at either changing the creative or thinking about expanding what you're trying to do, the audience size, et cetera. So that's really the number I look at, along with other metrics. I've had ad sets that have been at 5 in frequency for remarketing, and they still are doing okay, but I will notice that as it gets above that number, my click-through rate and my cost per click increase, and my relevance score changes and starts to decline. And so then I know it's a signal that I need to change the creative. I mean, what's your rule, generally speaking, on the frequency, John?
Well, I think context also matters, because, okay, you've got a frequency of 3. Well, is that 3 over 3 days or 3 over 3 months?
That's exactly right. Yeah, generally speaking, I'm looking in a 7-day window is what I'm looking at.
And the second thing would be, well, where are the placements here that you're using? Because if let's say you're only using desktop mobile newsfeed, having a frequency of 2 or 3 over a week, you're kind of pushing the limits, as opposed to you're running ads that are also in the sidebar and 2 of your 3 that you've reached them on is in the sidebar. It's like, I don't think that's nearly as big of a deal, because people kind of ignore those. They're cheap, cheap impressions. And so that actually may not contribute to a high or a poor frequency where it actually leads to bad results.
I think you're exactly right. Exactly right. All right. Thank you for that question, by the way. Keep them coming, folks. We look forward to answering those. So let's talk about some industry advice on scaling as we go into this. A lot of industry experts say the best way to increase scale is simply by increasing the budget. Not a bad suggestion, again, but it can't be just that, right? So it builds that house on a shaky foundation. The other thing that's confusing about this is if you read an article on scaling from 2 years ago, even it was common to scale accounts with 1 or 2 great ads and spend $100K a month. I mean, that was actually pretty normal, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. So kind of something to mention there. The other common advice surrounds scaling intraday. So one of them is you're shifting budgets during different parts of the day. So you start to spend a certain amount. This is what a certain colleague in the industry calls surfing. So this is basically you turn them up and then you turn them down throughout the day. This is something that's, it can be successful, but it requires an incredible amount of monitoring. So you have to be watching them as things go on, turn them up at different parts of the day, turn them down. And even with automated rules and proven creative, you have to have a lot of data to make this work. So I'd be very careful to try this if I were you, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest this. And I wouldn't suggest it for the majority of you right now. If you're spending, let's say, $100,000 plus a month, doing this tactic could work occasionally, but I would be very careful with it because it requires, a lot of work of setting up those rules. Another one is using bid overrides. So this is on the bidding, and we're going to talk about bidding on Thursday very in depth. And how do you kind of bid for scale? And one of the tactics is using some of the overrides, looking at it, but this is basically the general things you may have seen this, and I want to just clear this up, that bidding 3 to 5 times the cost per acquisition of your product for a conversion in many cases, you're telling Facebook you'd like to win that auction, right? So this is saying, I want to say I'm willing to spend $150 if it's a $50 CPA. I use this method, and I use this method from about 2015 until about 2016-ish, 2017, early last year. And it's something I haven't been doing for quite a while now because Facebook is smarter, right? The automatic bidding method, generally speaking, will work a lot better for me. So I would be weary of using the this method of doing a bid override unless you are very confident in your ads and you're also spending a lot of money. So I'd be very cautious of this advice as it goes through it. So Facebook, of course, also has its own advice, and some of it's okay. And I link in the documents that you'll get actually once watch this recording, the Facebook advice on it. One of the things they talk about is target cost bidding, and this is one that we had a little debate about in the Power Hitters Club on target cost bidding, and they say the target cost bidding strategy is the best way to maintain a stable cost per result while your ad set is optimized for increasing the budget. So you're saying, hey, I want the CPA to be this, and this is what it looks like. If you have target cost, some of you in other countries may not have target cost, and it's basing it on what your account previously said. This is something that algorithmically, in a large majority of cases, it actually doesn't help you win auctions, and it'll choke your results significantly. And so I would be very careful of this, but it's something that Facebook will suggest to you. So a lot of people use automatic bidding, and a lot of us use automatic. And so what target cost does is, for some reason, it enters you into this auction that's like the sub auction, and it actually this brings your results down over time, and it's not going to help you win. And so you may achieve a conversion or a couple conversions at the rate that you want, but your ad will show much less. So it's really hard for scaling. It's really cost forward scaling or cost controlled scaling. And so this is sort of what Facebook calls cost controlled scaling, versus a cost forward method would be like the bid override method, or an automatic bid. So I think be careful around this, because the idea is to stabilize performance, but in a lot of cases it suffers. And I do want to say though, this idea could begin to work better. And there's somebody in the Power Hitters Club that mentioned and said, for me, what I do is I actually run my ads on a 7-day automatic bid, 7-day click, 1-day view, and then once it gets up to a certain amount of conversions, I switch it to target cost. So we'll talk more about this again tomorrow as we go into, on Thursday as we go into bidding much more in depth. But it's something to just be careful of if you've heard that. So a lot of people claim scaling is easy, right? It's not. I think some of the biggest considerations: do I have the creative resources in place to support more pitches and hooks? Do I have the time to closely monitor the various ads I'm running? Do I know the calculations needed at, numbers wise? And do I have a multi-part plan for pitches and audiences? So we're just going to go through these common mistakes, a couple more common mistakes that I see that I want to be just setting from the outset for you to make sure, which is the stabilization period. So it's an incredibly important concept when scaling. When you're making changes to the ad set as you're increasing budget, you really have to wait 48 to 72 hours before making another change. Now, it does affect the learning phase, which we'll talk about as well, but more importantly, it's really difficult to make a call on something with less than 48 hours of data. I often think for me, if I'm bidding in a 7-day window using automatic bidding and I'm making changes outside of 7 days, that's okay, but it's really hard to make a determination on it. So I'll see people say, hey, it did well yesterday, I'm going to scale it today, right? Or it goes back to kind of that intraday. It did great this morning, I'm going to scale it up, and then I'm going to scale it down tonight. Well, again, not a bad idea, and it can work, but it's very rare that it'll work in many cases because it's going to, you're kind of confusing the auction, right? You're not letting Facebook learn over time. So I think that's an important thing to notice around moving too quickly. Another thing that I'll see that's very common, remarketing is not figured out, right? There's two main types of remarketing. There's dynamic product ads, website custom audience remarketing. Most commonly, advertisers will have 2 remarketing campaigns running. Some of you may have this. You'll have a dynamic product ad remarketing pool based off of a catalog, viewed or added to cart, and you'll have a 30-day website custom audience remarketing. And this is, again, not a bad thing, but as you scale, it's going to be more difficult. So instead of kind of what we just talked about, what I like to think about is splitting things out differently with those hooks. So this is a preview into more of what I'm really going to be focusing on here, which is creating more complexity within this, right? And hopefully this is helpful to you to refer back to it as time goes on. But, we're making different pitches to different parts of the funnel and the way that we're talking to them. So as you scale, simple remarketing tactics aren't going to work. Your frequencies are going to be too high. As we talked about earlier, same person will see the same pitch multiple times, and it doesn't meet that person where they are, right? What if a salesman stopped by your house every day and for 14 days in a row said the same thing? It just doesn't work as well. Another common one with scaling, inventory snafus. I'm just going to mention this quickly, which is before you scale, make sure you have enough inventory. This is, I would say, outside of doing the financial calculations incorrectly, probably the most common thing is people really start to scale that I see as a problem, the run out. So then they have to start over again. So be really careful on that. On the budget cap, it's another common one. As you start to spend more too in the United States, every account starts at $250 a day that it's spending, and as you increase from $250 a day to $750 a day, it'll slowly raise itself, what's called your budget cap within your actual Facebook ads account. And once you've hit that daily limit, it actually many times stops spending. Sometimes you'll get a rep that reaches out to you, sometimes in the United States, depends on where you are. But I've seen this happen where it hits at $750 a day and it'll hit that in the morning once you start to scale, and then it stops. So if you're planning on scaling past that amount, you have to request it via Facebook Help. Which is very easy to get a hold of. If you have questions about that, we can get into that. But this is where you can check it out under billing, under your business manager billing, and you can head into payment settings, and then you can go into manage, and you can look at kind of what that is, and you can change that threshold. And it won't let you change it past $750 a day. So this is where you'll need help from a rep. So just a common one, really quick to mention. Now, the learning phase is something that a lot of us, frankly, Facebook rolled it out, and it's hard to understand, and it's fairly confusing. And I was in Austin actually in February with their sales team and had a very in-depth discussion with multiple Facebook representatives actually about the learning phase. And what this is you may have seen this on the ad set level. It lives there, and it requires 50 conversions per week to complete. So I'm just going to talk about this in the context of a conversion campaign. But the conversion is sort of whatever action your ad set is optimized for. So if you've optimized under a conversion campaign for, let's say, add to cart, it'll require 50 adds to cart per week to stabilize. The reason that they invented the learning phase is in an attempt to stabilize delivery. So learning how much data needs to be gathered to deliver your ad to the right people. And so that they're trying to basically say, okay, 50 per week over a 7-day period is enough for us to learn. And from there, then it'll stabilize your delivery and it'll be more predictable. And so this is what Facebook says, whether you edit it or whether you start it. So an edit does qualify that it would restart the learning phase. It's trying to find those people in the kind of the thing that we talked about early in this presentation. And so this is, you'll notice as you roll over, you can see kind of what it's saying, and they'll say learning in many cases, right? And it'll tell you since your last significant edit, when that edit was. And it's incredibly frustrating, right? Because a lot of us, 50 purchases or 50 conversions a week, that's really hard to achieve. And how do you know that, right? How are you going to actually get there? So an example, right? $25 cost per acquisition goal times 50 conversions per week per ad set, meaning you're going to spend $1,250 spent minimum in that ad set to achieve your goals, which for a lot of people is not necessarily realistic. So it also resets after you change things. You change the targeting, you change the ad creative, you change the optimization event, pause the ad set of the campaign, it'll do that, and it won't be affected if you change the bid or the budget. So dealing with this, right, there's a couple options that you have. You can consolidate audiences into the fewer ad sets. So we'll talk about this audience consolidation, but you can consolidate these things into fewer ad sets to get as close to that 50 per week. So over time, you can separate them out, but initially bringing lookalike audiences and remarketing audiences together as you're kind of trying to help Facebook learn about you, especially if you're newer, that can be helpful to get to that learning phase. Or you can move the pixel event up. So you can, instead of optimizing for a purchase, you can optimize for an add to cart, and it'll find people quicker that are, look like those that would add to cart, potentially getting you closer to the 50. So this is a topic that'll no doubt be sprinkled throughout kind of our conversation here together. But the learning phase is something that is a frustrating point for a lot of advertisers, and consolidation is a really big part of it. So this is kind of what we're talking about. Try moving that into a different purchase intent area by looking at your pixel dashboard. In terms of the numbers game, this is a thing that I just want to point out. Doing the numbers, this is really going to be in a lot of your homework. This is how I've helped some people scale, and this is their reaction, is the Chris Farley here, which is they're really excited that things are going well, and then they realize that their cost per acquisition was too high, or that they actually didn't make as much money as they thought they did because they hadn't worked on those financial calculations. So really quickly, asking yourself a few questions, right? What's that average order value? What's your lifetime value? What's the margin percentage? And again, I'm not going to walk through these with each and every one of you, but know what these numbers are, and please do your math so you know what your cost per lead is that you absolutely have to hit, including your cost of goods sold, or including your lead nurturing cost. And I think that's really, really important, right? And so as we go into this, understanding your lifetime value, you can absolutely be understanding of this. You can look at Facebook Analytics. You can look at your lifetime value under Facebook Analytics. And if you go into analytics.facebook.com, there's a beautiful little graph there on lifetime value, which I love, and you can see what that number might be. But let's just take, for example, right, that your cost per 1,000 impressions is between $8 and $25, right? Generally speaking, on Facebook and Instagram, it's where it lies. So there needs to be at least 1,000 people that see your ad per day. And that's kind of a metric that I'm trying to, follow along with. And 50 conversions per week per ad set. So that's the learning phase piece. So at a minimum, let's say you'll have a prospecting ad set and one bottom funnel remarketing one going. So you'll have a $15 a day, $30 a day on both of those times 30 days. There's $900 a month bare minimum. So that just gives you an idea of kind of the budget. So in most cases, Facebook wants you to optimize ad set budgets based on what the cost is of a conversion. Too, so if your average order value is $50, you ideally, in Facebook's world, if they were recommending to you, you'd spend $50 per ad set per day. And this is a challenging proposition for a lot of people. So I think that they're looking at the overall number of events. So what I'm trying to get at here is understanding what those lifetime value is, what the cost per acquisition is, how much room do you have there, and also then how close can you get from the previous concepts we talked about of consolidation of that learning phase to getting close to, at least if you're gonna try to do a $25 a day budget and your cost per acquisition is $25 a day, you could get one conversion in, right? That's going to be, I think, closer to what you're trying to do. So the more events happening, the more data, and therefore it's a little bit faster. So let's take that $50 average order value as the continued example. $50 average order value, and you want Facebook's recommended 7 sales a day based on the learning phase. It's roughly 7 sales a day. It'd be 7 sales times $50, and there's 350 a day. And then you're looking at 10,500 a month. So, right, you're not going to be testing at this level. But what this proves is spending more time overall in condensing, and also not only the ad sets, but in a shortened period of time is really helpful too if you're trying to scale and test. You can spend, let's say, a shortened amount of budget over a certain amount of time, and that's going to be incredibly helpful for ad optimization. And I want to be clear, this is something that took me a really long time to understand. So if you're sitting there and saying, Andrew, this is kind of crazy, I don't totally get it, that's completely fine. Please ask questions and we'll get more in depth. So it's always going to lead a little bit to confusion. I've seen, just know what that cost per acquisition is, bottom line, and understand, maybe thinking about your lifetime value too, so there's a little bit more room in that number as you scale. So that's an important thing. So going into successful account structures. And I realize I'm really trying to go through this stuff quickly, and I'm trying to slow down a little bit and take it easy, but I want to make sure that I'm giving you as much value, so hopefully you'll go back and watch this as well. But the successful account structures that I see. So begin by asking yourself, when you're scaling, now we're going to talk about really as you're kind of starting to do this, what experiments do I want to run and in what part of the funnel, right? So some examples you may have is in the lower part of the funnel, right? You may say, I have a large and really loyal customer base. And maybe I haven't spoken to those people in a while. Maybe I haven't talked to them, and I feel like there's an opportunity to grow and try to scale my spend that way. A lot of us think of scaling and prospecting, but maybe you want to think about it the other way, right? Maybe you have a loyal and engaged email list. Maybe in the middle of the funnel, I have good engagement. I have a lot of people watching my video views. So understanding where you want to start. You can start in all of these places, but I recommend starting in one. So top funnel, I need more qualified traffic. So generally, many companies and organizations, such as yourself, you want more qualified traffic, right? So go about it this way. You start with prospecting experiments, then you go into remarketing experiments, and you go into loyalty and engagement experience. That's kind of the different phases we go into it. You can do this however you like. If you have a really good customer base, you've been around for a while and you haven't talked to those people, then think about scaling in phase 3. Think about that kind of loyalty one first and not necessarily the prospecting. But let's start with talking about some of the prospecting. And I think, well, let's start talking about overall, right? It's that there's kind of different pitches for different parts of this too, which is that on the prospecting side, you're going to have 15% off, and the engagers, you might have a BOGO offer. So this is kind of going with what we're talking about, multiple objectives, multiple pitches as time goes on. So in these scaling accounts that I have run, you're generally going to be using 60% of that budget for top of funnel prospecting. That's very common that you'll be pushing through. You have 20% bottom of the funnel to those recent visitors. And sometimes this can be increased as well, but this is a general rule that I see. Then you'll have a 5 to 10% of that budget that's based on loyalty, and 5 to 10% of it that's branding to kind of that bottom of the funnel or BOFU engager audience. So people split these differently, but this is generally kind of a rules where I fall in. So where those audiences fit in, right? Lookalikes, wide audiences we'll talk about in the next section, interests and behaviors. At that bottom of the funnel, you have website custom audiences, dynamic product ads, video watchers, and then in loyalty, you'll have previous customers, fans, and engagers. And one thing that's interesting is, as we talk about scaling, whenever I mention this to somebody, many of us, when we think about scale, never think about our previous customers. And so that's a great place to start if you do have something like that. So let's talk tactically. Some of my favorite audiences for scaling: previous customers, 30-day site visitors, active email list, email opens, previous engagers, meaning mostly Instagram or Facebook engagers. And these are some of my favorite audiences on the lookalike side. 1% VIP customers. They've spent over $100 or they've purchased more than 2 times. 1% lookalike of previous purchasers over a 30-day period in many cases. Add to carts is another one that I love. 1 and even a 3% of that for scaling. 1 and a 3% of a 2-time page view, which is something that my blog post mentions if you read that, to talk about this, kind of creating lookalikes of people that have viewed that page twice. 1% on the top 25% website custom audiences and the 5% as well, or 1% of converted leads. So these are some of my, people say, hey, I want to scale. These are some of the things that I set up as quickly as I can. So a scaling example is you would take something that starts like this. You take something that's a 1% lookalikes, ad set, 1%, and then you'd have the ad set for conversions for product sales, viewed or added to cart, 90-day dynamic product ad. And I would build it out eventually into something that looks like this. Now, this is not something I would say you go for immediately, but this is something that I wanted to give you an idea of kind of where we're going, of what these things look like and what options you have as you scale over time. So remember, as you build these things out too, duplication is your friend, right? You can go through and hit that duplicate button by selecting the ad set and change the name, and that's going to help you scale too. So just kind of remember that as you go into it. Now, grouping versus separating audiences, right? So in order to get close to that 50 conversions per week, it's a best practice to group lookalikes together initially into what Facebook, they call these super lookalikes. So instead of doing what I was talking about by separating them initially, you may want to try to group them. And in most cases, when I'm starting out with scaling, I'll group them together because my budget's lower, right? And as I begin to see success, then I'll begin to separate them out. And usually this is over a 30-day to 45-day period, I'll make sure that then they're not over 30% audience overlap. So how do you determine the audience overlap? You go in, and this is saying, you don't want to be bidding against yourself in the auction necessarily, right? So you go into audiences and you select 2 or more, and then you hit show audience overlap, and it'll tell you. So generally speaking, I like to group things together as we talked about, and then over time I'll say, oh man, that ad set of 1% lookalikes grouped together is doing great. Now I'm going to separate these things out, and I'm going to start testing as I've seen if their audience overlap is not north of 30%. I'm going to give that a shot. And one of the final things we talk about here today is adding multiple objectives too. So as you start to scale, thinking about using multiple objectives. We talked previously about something along these lines, right? Looking at the conversions for top of the funnel, looking at the bottom of the funnel, product set, previous buyers. And what I'm suggesting as well is if you may have some of this framework set up. So you may say, all right, what's next? Well, what's next is something like this, which is adding in, let's say, a video view on the top funnel for prospecting to try to help build those seed audiences. You may try a catalog sales for top of the funnel for broad match dynamic ads, which we'll talk about on Thursday. And you may try, something like a page post engagement to previous buyers and fans. Maybe since page post engagement reaches a wider selection of that audience, you may want to try that to previous buyers and fans. So these are kind of some of the other multiple objectives you can get to. And I think a lot of times we think about building ad sets with only one objective in mind, right? Based on exactly what we're trying to achieve. So if we want conversions, we're going to build conversion campaigns. But try utilizing those multiple objectives. Try different ways of getting in front of people in different time windows to drive the best user experience. So I think that's a really important one to mention. And in the final thing here, we'll talk about naming conventions. And naming conventions, to me, this is a common thing that I will see, right? When I'm auditing an account, you can see it'll say post, 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 and I don't know what this is. This doesn't make sense to me. So for me, this is the way that I like to name my campaigns. And this is just a reference for you. You don't have to name your campaigns any way that you want. I have date. I always put the campaign name, the audience in the ad set level, the placement, and the bid type. You can do this however you want, but my point is when you are scaling, you should absolutely set up naming conventions, because the naming conventions are going to help you to make sense of it. They're going to help you to look at it quicker. They're going to help you to understand what's working and what's not. So this is a really important thing that I would recommend doing. And there's countless ways to do it, but think about kind of normalizing some of the naming conventions as you go forward. So your homework assignment for this one, just kind of prepare. There's plenty of creative for future scaling. Plan for scale via audiences and funnels. So sit down and map that funnel and the audiences. What else can you build from what you've learned today? What else can you test? What other things can you add to your objectives and to your ads that are going to help you scale? Maybe build out some of those as well, and then rename some of those campaigns. So congratulations. You've completed session one. Winger is saying congratulations. And again, let me say it's a great honor to present this all to you, and hopefully you have found this first session really helpful. And again, if you have any questions, always feel free to ask here, or you can always contact me at Foxwell Digital, and we will go from there. So what's next? This is what we're going to go over the next time. We're going to go over dynamic product ads, season pixels, some really deep stuff on bidding, placement expansions. We're going to go into it. It's going to be awesome. So I look forward to seeing those of you on Thursday, but let's get to that Q&A, and I look forward to answering all of your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So for those of you who don't know, we've got questions coming in from two places. So we've got those of you who purchased this training as a standalone and GoToWebinar. We've got questions coming there. And we're also streaming this via Facebook Live to the Power Hitters Club Elite private Facebook group, which is our exclusive membership level. So they're asking questions there too. We're going to prioritize the questions coming in from GoToWebinar, because after we shut this down, those questions kind of disappear. Whereas we can go in later and answer the questions that are coming in to the Facebook group. So just heads up there. Trevor just had a question at the very beginning regarding, what types of budgets have you scaled? So for example, are you going from $10,000 to $100,000, or what have you been doing?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's been everything from $1,000 a month to 100,000 to, man, I've done it. See, I had two last year that were in the 200,000. They were in the 100,000 range, 120, 150,000 range when I started, and then they were scaling up to, really north of 300, 400,000, 500,000. I have an account I'm working with now that's they are spending, about 200. They're about $250,000 every 7 days. So that's kind of what I've done there.
And do you have a general rule of thumb on how many ads you should have running in an ad set at once?
Yeah, I mean, I personally like only to have one, and people do this differently. If you have a huge ad set budget, right? Let's say that client I was just talking about, the $250,000, they would have something. They normally have, I think, usually around 5. In Facebook, because of the size of those ad sets in terms of the budget, is going to grow that significantly. and they're going to show all those ads, but generally I only have one or two. I mean, just because the way that Facebook optimizes is not going to be worth it otherwise.
Ashley asked, when changing the creative, should you create a new ad set or turn off the old ad and run a new one within the same ad set?
For me, I like to, if the ad set is doing well and there's good data there, I like to at least first try duplicating that ad and trying the same ad in that ad set. Now, other people and other times I've done this as well, shutting that off and then starting it again is helpful. But a lot of times the learning that I've had on that previous ad set is helpful, especially in remarketing. So turning that ad off and trying a new ad to that audience is generally something that can work. I don't know, what's your opinion on that, John?
I already moved on to the next question, man. You lost me.
All right, next question.
Adam says, our agency doesn't sell products, but cars, so no add to cart. How do you approach horizontal scaling trying to attract auto buyers to our ads?
That's a super good question. I really appreciate you asking that. I think, basically with horizontal scaling, what you're trying to do is Facebook hits all the different objectives, hit different types of people in different parts of the funnel. So I am somebody that may be in an engager, an audience. If you think about a circle and you draw a circle that's 80% of the size of that circle, within that circle, that's the page post engagers. If you think about converters or people that buy, that's going to be a much lower percentage of those people. So when you think about kind of reaching as many different people as you can, when you think about horizontal scaling, try multiple objectives. I would have, let's say to your audience, if you're selling cars, I would have video views running. I would have page post engagement ads running. I would have slideshows running. I'd have carousels running. I would have, you could do, if you have, even though you don't have an add to cart, you could do a lookalike of people that have viewed your page view 2 times. Maybe they filled out an inquiry form and you could fire a trigger off of that. But it's really trying a lot of different ad types in different parts of the funnel and seeing what's going to work. And then alongside of that, I would definitely recommend, if you can, for your dealership, setting up offline conversion ad sets, right? Or offline conversion event set, which allows you to see then, okay, all your salesmen and women write down their leads and their email addresses and to be able to match back, hopefully. So that's a really exciting proposition because you can do so much there as you think about horizontal scaling.
Yeah, I like the opportunities with auto dealerships, and it's funny because I just bought a new car on Friday, and I was definitely getting served ads as a result of my searching around for stuff. But you have to remember that not everybody is ready to, I want to get a quote, or I want to have a dealer call me or a salesperson call me right away. So I think those videos are awesome in this case, as kind of a different place in that funnel, showing them different cars based on what they engage with, maybe carousel as well, then take them further down the funnel. So lots of opportunities there. And also want to apologize to Ashley because seriously, I completely forgot her question, but now it just occurred to me what the question was regarding do you turn off that first ad set or start a new one. So I keep that same ad set going as well. I think that's what you were going as well on that.
Yep.
Ahmed said, if you create more ad sets in the same campaign to horizontally scale, won't they compete? How about multiple ads within the same ad sets? I'm curious about the balance between competition and variety of scaling.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? Which is why we talked about audience overlap. And hopefully that answered that question a little bit for you. But one thing you can do too, that I love to do, is launching different types of ads at the same audience. So sometimes to my, let's say, 14-day remarketing audience, so people that have been to my website, I'll have something running like a video view ad that's a branding ad, kind of talking about, for video views that talks about the story of that company. And I'll also have a conversion ad running. So that's kind of how I go about it as I horizontally scale. They're not in the same campaign then because they'd be a different objective. But for those that are in, always looking at that audience overlap, absolutely, always checking the audience overlap, and trying to look at that. One thing that's very common, if you'll look at an account that really has scaled big time, is you'll look and see they'll have usually a 1% of page view, and then you'll have an ad set of 1% of a lookalike of an MVP customer or something, and they'll have an interest grouping, and then they'll have a different interest grouping, a different ad set, and they've separated them out. So that's really that process I was talking about, of starting with things consolidated and then separating them out over time as you start to see performance. That's why scaling takes a long time. I mean, it's annoying because you want it to go quickly, but it's something that can't be achieved super quickly in many cases, just because you have to test and learn and wait really for Facebook to get there.
Yeah, and something to consider is if you have a higher audience overlap, but you're using lots of different audiences, well, you can exclude one audience from a particular ad set to kind of prevent that overlap.
Absolutely.
So, something else I've done too is, let's say, for example, you've got 365-day engagement, page engagement. So it could be a pretty big audience. You don't necessarily have to hit that entire 365-day audience with the same thing. You could do people who engaged during the last 30 days for this one thing, people who engaged during the last 30 to 60 days with this other thing, and so on. So you can avoid the overlap there as well. Let me see here. So Michelle says, our agency works with destinations a lot with no website conversion. Would I still want to keep the frequency about the same?
I wonder, what does destinations mean, do you think, in this context?
I think she's talking about physical location where you're just trying to drive people to the destination.
Oh, okay. So you're still trying to get that frequency. Yeah, I mean, I think that still lives. I mean, the general rule for scaling, it's hard because you want to spend more, but it's in different thresholds for this. There's many different thresholds for this, I would say. But if my general rule is that if somebody's seen something 3 to 4 times, they haven't done anything, it's gonna be hard to get them to do something.
Right.
With the same message, right?
Right. This is a matter of,
So whether you're pitching a destination or trying to sell a product or trying to get leads, that's a good metric to follow.
Right. I think the mistake is oftentimes advertisers just say, oh, we got 3 or 4 frequency there, so they abandon that audience entirely. But the reality is you can just try a completely different, creative or approach. Let's see here. Matt says, for lead gen, what do you deem a successful conversion rate from ad to landing page for both a page view and a lead or complete registration?
Oh, I mean, this varies by vertical in so many different places. I mean, here's the thing, right? There are people that would do what is typically in the industry, right? Like a squeeze page, which would drive people to a place that doesn't necessarily it has a very hidden nav bar, and it kind of squeezes you into one place and you say, yeah, I want that thing. And in that case, for leads, it could be, you could have a conversion rate that's 70%, in many cases, when you're talking about lead gen, for me, and I work with a custom home builder on this. I mean, I've done a lot of lead gen stuff. It's generally speaking, in, let's just say, to the common Joe Facebook user, what I'm looking for is really like a 10%, if I can get that. In an e-com conversion rate, I think you're crushing it if you're at a 5%, 6%. So I don't know about you, John. What do you think of that metric?
Honestly, I'm worried. I'm worried more. Yeah, I'm worried more about what the cost per conversion is, and of course, at that point, it matters. What is at what point to have a positive return on ad spend.
Sure.
So, Emran, I think this question we're going to be talking more about on Thursday. But he says, I have big cap, which is actually something I've been experimenting with lately. So using the lowest cost bid strategy and setting a big cap instead of that maximum option, which is the old way. And you want to know what the difference is. The old way we just said, basically said, I have big cap instead of the maximum option. where you just set a maximum. And I think that those are pretty much the same thing. It's
Oh,
just,
yeah. Yep, they are. Yeah, they're the same thing. Yeah, it's confusing, and I'm glad that you asked that question.
so basically Facebook just, and it's only for certain objectives or for certain optimization, I believe.
That's correct.
That bid strategy is there now, and it's not everybody has it, I don't think. And so it's a matter of kind of trying to clarify bid strategy and how to use it is what they're doing now.
Exactly.
Thomas says, I have a client who turns off their ad sets when performance in the first half of the day is poor, since historically the morning performance and afternoon and night performance is highly correlated. Do you think this impacts Facebook algorithm and would not be ideal?
Okay, so I do believe that would impact delivery and it would impact the performance of the ads. However, if that client has seen, hey, yeah, actually this does work better for me, then what I would suggest doing is running it as a lifetime budget and then day parting it. So setting it when it runs, right? Instead of like saying, set a lifetime budget and then you get to schedule the ad when it runs. And then it's basically telling the auction like, oh, okay, only pay attention to it now. What it's doing when you're turning it off and on is resetting the learning phase every time, which is going to adversely affect your performance.
Good point. Matt asked, how much priority do you pay to your relevance score?
I actually pay quite a bit of attention to it. I mean, when it came out, John and I are both of the same school of thinking of this. Probably many of you that have been advertising for a while, where something new comes out and you're like, okay, that's cool. I like that, but like, we'll see how it works, right? We'll see how that actually goes. And I think that's the same with the relevance score. Initially, I was like, I don't know. I mean, but it really has been a very strong signal for me. And one of the things we'll talk about next Thursday is social proofing, which is something that can help in the algorithm when you scale to give your ad a high relevance score, because social proof gives it priority to some degree in the algorithm. And so I pay attention to it, and it's tough. It's a tough game, and it's not the be all and end all, right? I've had things where I've had a 3% click-through rate and my relevance score is 3. Well, then it's really hard to determine, but in most cases I'll see that it correlates along with other declining metrics. So I'll see that it's like, okay, it's an 8, and then the next day it's like a 5 or something, and then I'm watching, and then by the following Monday it's a 3. Well, then I've got a problem, right? I've got an issue on my hand, and I've got to figure out a different way to pitch it. And ultimately, when I've done that, I've had to go back to the drawing board on kind of the hooks example we talked about earlier of what's the pitch, how am I pitching this, how am I representing this, and is this something that people are going to care or even understand within a 2-second window that they're looking at this?
Yeah, Frederico asks, how can you scale for something like Black Fridays or Cyber Monday campaigns where you don't have time?
Such a good question. We're talking about that on Thursday. I actually have a slide dedicated to that. So, boom.
Cool. All right, then. Matt wanted clarification on what a dynamic product ad is.
Oh, a dynamic product ad is an ad that is based off of your product catalog. So if you have a product catalog or you have multiple products on your website, more than, let's say, 5, you can launch an ad that will pull dynamically from somebody goes to look at that specific product. They can show an ad to that person based on that they've looked at that product. So that's what a dynamic product ad is. They're a really successful part of the mix, and definitely if you're thinking about scaling and you're in e-com, it's something I would suggest doing, very quickly.
Eduardo asks, what do you think of using different creative for different days of the week?
I think it's an interesting concept, right? I mean, if you have it where you're able to do that, you could probably set it up so that each ad set had its own ad set lifetime budget, and then turned on one day and turned off the next day, and the other, you could kind of have that. It probably would be harder to scale, but I like the idea of having, especially to remarketing, changing that up. There's a client that I work with now, and they have a very active Instagram audience. So their Instagram engager audience is really active, and they get a lot of comments and things there. So what I've done is launched Instagram stories. Every 2 days, I change the creative to somebody that's engaged with them in the last 7 days on Instagram. And that is at a 5x right now. So it's great, right? Changing it every few days. They have a lot of creative for me. And all I'm doing is actually just taking it from their Instagram stories anyway. So it's content that they're producing already. They don't have to create something new for me.
Cool. Matt, I'm not real clear on this question. If you change your pixel constantly, which I'm not sure what he means by changing your pixel constantly, doesn't that mess up the original campaign objective and data Facebook delivers in Ads Manager? So I don't know if he's just referring to that point we talked about switching whether you optimize for conversion or add to cart.
Sure. Yeah, if you change that optimization event under Pixel, right, from add to cart to purchase, if you change that often, that is going to definitely mess with delivery. And what I would say is, I mean, the reason you'd want to do that, let me just start from there. The reason that you'd want to do that is because you are not seeing the amount of performance, let's say, to get you close to 50 per week through the learning phase that you are wanting. So you would want to try to basically, it's called moving the event up, moving the pixel up is what people call it. And that'll help you achieve that. And if you're changing that often, yeah, that's not going to be a good thing. But it's something that will hopefully, if a person that adds to cart is a person that's a strong signal for you. If you notice that people that add to cart, looking at Facebook analytics, if you can see that people add to cart, there's a high percentage of people that then purchase, then that's going to be a good thing to optimize for. But yeah, you do have to be careful with it, and that's a great question.
Anya, the learning phase is available everywhere, right? Anya's saying not familiar with learning phase, and they're in the UK.
The learning phase was rolled out globally, as far as I know, and I believe it was rolled out globally in January. So if you don't have it, then sweet.
Well, the thing is, everybody should have it, whether or not Facebook says learning phase, because
True.
The way I understand it, learning phase has actually been around for a while. It's just now that they're actually telling you that it's in the learning phase, right?
Yes, that is actually true. That's something I learned from many of our colleagues in the Power Hitters Club.
Fiona says, if I have a new Pixel, new account, and they have a CPL target, is it best to start with fewer ad sets at a higher daily spend?
Mm-hmm. You are right on what I'm trying to say, my friend. You are exactly right. So exactly, if you are brand new, try the consolidation, try with a higher daily spend, try it over a shorter period of time. So, you could do a 30-day test if you wanted or something, but I would encourage you to consolidate that into a 14-day test and spend more to try to help it learn faster so that you can determine things quicker. And that'll help to inform things later on. That's a mistake certainly that I've made a lot, actually. So I'll say, okay, yeah, we'll test this for 45 days and I'll take the budget and spread it out over 45 days, where what I should have done is consolidated it over 14 days or even 10 days to get the signal stronger. And I'll say, oh, okay, so now I know this is this, and now I'm going to restart this, or I'm going to kind of build this out in a different way. And I now know kind of what my thresholds are.
And by the way, regarding the learning phase in the UK, Zoli says that they've got it in the UK. Helen says she just got it added last week.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for letting us know, friends. I appreciate that.
How do you track return on ad spend at the top of the funnel, or do it manually with all spend on the account?
No, I just look at it from the ad set perspective within reporting, and we'll talk about reporting on Thursday, but I just look at it return on ad spend within the ads manager, actually looking at top of the funnel because my prospecting top of the funnel ad sets are broken out from remarketing. So that's how I'm looking at that.
Is there a good practice for how many ad sets per campaign you should have? Like, for example, never have more than 50 or a number like that?
People do. I mean, I've seen people that are able to manage, 40 ad sets per campaign. To me, anytime I get above, let's say, 20 ad sets, it's like, it's a lot.
I don't know how
really hard to manage, right? And generally speaking, you're going to be better off having fewer ad sets and spending more on those ad sets.
Let's see here. Drew says here for one reason, have a long-running successful ad started at $40 a day, consistent results for over 6 months, and about an 8-to-1 return. Would like the best practice to get this ad to say $200 a day. So, I mean, I think that's kind of what we're talking about and providing some ideas there. But anything you want to add to that?
No, and his name is Drew.
Yeah.
Drew, I feel you. I definitely do. So this is something that we're talking about, which is if you want to get that particular ad set to $200 a day, you can totally do that via the method of vertical scaling. You can try it, increasing it by 20% every 48 hours to 72 hours and seeing if it scales. However, you will also need to be alongside of it, be building that foundational aspect of more lookalikes, trying interests, trying behaviorals, trying conversion objective, and trying page post engagement objective, and trying previous customer loyalty remarketing, and trying a broad match dynamic product ad, which is letting Facebook decide how to find the most valuable people that are likely to convert. It's akin to Moneyball, right? If you've ever seen the movie, you have to get on base. It's all about just getting more people on base. And I would say you have to kind of build out that horizontal scaling system. Because what will happen is you may increase that and it may get to 200 a day and you could do it, but eventually that will die. And it'll be very painful if you don't have other things that you've been testing alongside of it. So I would try different pixel events and doing remarketing off of those. Some of the things I mentioned in the 8th section, of scaling audiences that I use. Try some more stuff. Try some different stuff. Look at the overlap between them. See what happens. Get more people in the funnel. Try some different remarketing flows and see what else you can get so that when you have a system instead of just one thing.
So I think, Tony, you may have answered your own question, but he says, what is the best way to avoid overlapping in a campaign when targeting different lookalike audiences? So for example, when using a lookalike audience 1% and 2% for an outreach campaign, to avoid overlapping, do you need to exclude the other audience, or will different ad sets exclude each other? You would need to exclude the other if your goal is to avoid the overlapping, because that 2% is going to include the 1%.
Yes. So I'll just say really quickly on this. This is technical, but the strategy there of 1% excluding the 2% excluding the 1%, that is a strategy that Facebook reps have been talking about a long time. They call it nesting lookalikes. And you're doing that exclusion. And what a lot of advertisers have found is that Facebook actually, as you get more data, it's smart enough to understand the difference. And it's generally smart enough to understand the difference between a 1% and like a 3%, but it's harder and you'll see more of an overlap and potentially adversely affect your campaign or ad set performance. If you have a 2% and then 1% and you're not excluding that 1% out of the 2%. So I would say try a little bit bigger lookalike and try them and see without exclusion what Facebook does with that. Because sometimes doing that nesting strategy can actually hurt performance. So it's something to try. There's a gentleman I interviewed on podcast, Justin, who's in the Power Hitters Club, and he talked about not really doing a lot of exclusion within that because Facebook is smart enough to know the difference in a lot of his accounts. So it depends, and that's not a great answer, but I would try experimenting without it and with it and see if there's any difference in performance that you have.
A clarification on the homework, you will be emailed that homework, and not only will it be in the email, but in the replay notes, the homework will be there too. So anyone who is frantically, what was the homework? Don't worry about it.
We're not going to check your homework. Don't worry. It's fine.
Yeah. Is there a good strategy to scale up for a new e-commerce store?
Yeah, it's exactly the things we're talking about. It's trying initially, if you're brand new, trying 1% lookalikes of those best customers, or maybe you don't have those. So then it's really starting with interests and behaviorals using audience insights. And we're going to talk about that on Thursday. But, looking at kind of doing market research. And this, John, you wrote about this, in 2015, 2014, right? Of where do I start if I start from scratch? And it's really doing the research. And then as you build that pixel audience, doing some lookalikes off of that, as you kind of get more, and over time, it builds upon itself, definitely.
Let me see here. Any chance, Helen says, any chance you can specifically cover scaling for, say, like campaigns and CPC campaigns as well as e-commerce sales next time, even if it's just briefly?
Yeah, I mean, they're the same concepts, generally speaking. If you have specific questions about that, you can email me, of course, Andrew at Foxwell Digital. I'm happy to chat about that. They're the same things, right? It's using same audiences. If you're, using kind of building them out horizontally, how are you trying to build out like campaigns in terms of cost per clicks and CPC campaigns and traffic campaigns? Same concept. You're trying to build it with different types of content and different hooks and different pitches, and so the same tactics apply, but there are nuances to it, like using page post engagement objective in a cost per, if you're trying to drive clicks, sometimes can be even less expensive than doing a traffic campaign, right? So that's kind of something. But yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk about it. I mean, we can get into it if you want to, but some of the lessons next time are also helpful for that.
Regarding the replay, it's going to be available in the powerhittersclub.com. So it doesn't matter whether you bought it standalone or you're part of PHC Elite, the replay is going to be in the same place. George asks, would you duplicate an ad or edit it? I think I mean, it depends on what you're editing, but I think normally you would duplicate it. And what do you say?
Yeah, I would duplicate it.
Victoria says, when we talk about starting with one bidding strategy and then switching to another type, you mean duplicate the ad set, right? Not editing the bidding strategy for a running ad set?
You can do it either way. I usually would duplicate it and start a new, but I mean, if it has, in the example that we were talking about before, in that case, it had, it was running on automatic bidding, and then they switched it to target costs because that ad set had enough data. So it's, you can do it either way, but it's something to test. I would probably do a newer one, but if I'm switching to target cost bidding, then I would maybe keep it the same ad set actually.
A good question from Art. Any suggestions on scaling with a lower audience ceiling? So, for example, running a local business with a smaller population of less than 1 million.
Yeah, it's all about multiple objectives, Art. It's all about trying different things to get in front of people, because different types of objectives are going to reach different parts of that audience. So if you're a local business, I'd definitely recommend trying page post engagement. I definitely recommend trying brand awearness or reach objective. Definitely recommend, trying video views. I mean, we are working with a restaurant in Times Square right now, and our best successful audience that we've had in terms of getting audience penetration has been page post engagement. And because, it's reaching people. I mean, we get a lot of reach out of reach campaigns too, but the one that's actually driven people in is the PPE campaign.
Yeah, I mean, something you mentioned, the brand awareness reach objective. Another one would be daily unique reach. I mean, like if you feel like you've tapped out your audience, the reality is you haven't, right? So you've got, and we'll say an audience of potentially 500,000 people. Facebook's optimizing to show it to a sliver of that total group. So if you use something like reach engagement or brand awareness or daily unique reach, it won't be optimized anymore. So without expanding the audience, you're actually reaching more people. Let me see here.
Great questions, everybody.
Yeah, Robert said.
I celebrate. No, I'm very excited about that. So thank you, everybody.
Where were we? Robert says, how do you try things in all parts of the funnel? Is that simply setting up multiple ad sets under one campaign, targeting different people?
It can be a lot of different things. This is part of that homework of mapping this out a little bit. So trying different things in multiple parts of the funnel for you may mean, okay, what I want to do is I'm going to launch keep my conversion campaigns going. I'm prospecting and I'm going to have that going. What I'll do maybe then is start a campaign, for page post engagement. And that's going to be to my previous site visitors or my previous customers. Then I'm going to think about my middle of the funnel. Maybe that's my fans, or maybe that's the people that have been on my website in the last 180 days, but haven't been back in 30. So then I'm going to launch a reach objective to them to try to get in front of them. or you can design this however you're wanting it. It's really it's understanding what you're wanting to do, what the pitches you want to make, and it's not, how do you get them to understand what you're all about, and seeing if it's profitable as time goes on. I mean, that's really what I mean in terms of building out that multi-part funnel.
Just a heads up, we're already at an hour and a half. I don't know how much time you have, Andrew, but I'll probably cut this off in about 15 minutes, no more than that.
Sure.
Because I feel like these questions just keep building. Like as soon as I get through 5, there are 10 new ones. So, and when we get to the end, and if your question hasn't been answered, I'm sure Andrew would provide his email address. Even that's the way he is.
Yeah, you could just shoot me an email, andrew@foxwelldigital.com. I look forward to hearing from you. We'll use some of your questions in actually the part 2 next on Thursday. So yeah.
Jamal, have you tried to scale campaign budget optimization? Interesting question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't. I talked to, and I was actually in kind of deep discussion about this with 2 different agencies over the last couple of weeks, and they haven't seen it work as well. If you've seen that work, please let me know. I'm interested. But they haven't seen it. They haven't seen it work as well. It's an interesting tool. What it is basically, the things you're saying, hey, optimize these how you think you'd want them to be optimized to Facebook, basically. And it just hasn't worked as well. Have you heard anything about it, John?
I mean, my limited experiments with it is it didn't work as advertised. Yeah, because so basically what Facebook says is, instead of like creating 3 different ad sets at $10 a piece, $10 a day a piece, do a campaign budget of $30, and they'll distribute it in ways that'll give you more conversions. I was actually seeing everything was more expensive, but
yeah, it hasn't. I personally haven't tried it because I have, again, that kind of curmudgeon-y old man, like, I'm not going to do this until I've really seen it work or heard it's worked.
Right. Susan asked, what's the average duration of your campaigns, and how big is the audience, national versus local?
Oh, they're mostly, I work with the local businesses, but I also work with a lot of national and international businesses. And mostly the length of the campaigns is, I mean, how long am I letting things run, I guess. Mm-hmm. They're in many cases, they're always on. They don't stop. I would say that if you thought about it as how quickly does the entire structure turn over, maybe is a good way to think about it, right? Like every part of it's new is probably every 90 days in some cases. Some people do it very differently, but that's probably kind of a 90-day, I would say, rule for me on how long I'm turning things over, with the exception of probably dynamic product ads.
If you create a new creative, let's restart the learning phase.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you have advice for direct response for simpler offers versus a funnel? Just taking them to a landing page with an offer. Can this still work?
Oh, yeah, that can definitely still work. And we're going to talk about that next time as well, which is some of the most popular options that I have. But yeah, I mean, or that I've seen. But yeah, taking them to a page with an offer is definitely still a popular thing. It's more popular now to mention the offer in the ad and drive them to a landing page where they can use that code or whatever, but taking them to a place that's like, yes, I want to claim this offer is still popular. I would say it's less popular now than it once was, because Facebook has gotten a lot more stringent on landing pages. So that strategy of click here to claim and enter your email is something Facebook doesn't like generally at this point, because it's not a great user experience, because it kind of traps people. So it's become a little bit more difficult, but yeah.
Kellen asks, how often do you typically recommend updating the creative and ad copy for a campaign?
I mean, we are going to talk about creative and copy next week in terms of some of the main things that I've seen, or next week on Thursday. I change it, as I said earlier. I mean, I change some things. I change them once a week. Some things I'm going to change them every 14 days. I mean, I may have a prospecting ad set that is at a frequency of 2, and that it's going to run for 30 days because it's not a huge budget, right? So I'm not going to change that if it's ROAS positive, but I may change it, little bit later in terms of like maybe 45 days, but most commonly we're changing it every couple of weeks, trying to changing things out generally. Yeah.
So Companion Lab is doing bid testing, basically creating 10 different ad sets with different bid values. What is a theoretical argument for this?
I love that. I love this. The theoretical idea is that bidding differently to the same audience is probably what they're doing, can reach different parts of the audience. It's the same argument for why you try multiple objectives. So everything that you do, the main signals that are within that auction, right? I mean, there's a lot of signals, but two of the main signals are the opportunity of one, how are you bidding at them? And two, what objective are you using to get in front of them? So under a conversion objective, it's probably, and they're changing bid options. What they're probably doing is saying, okay, of the people that convert, there's a certain segment that will convert automatically. And then there's a certain segment that are converters, but will convert on a link click bid. Or there's a certain segment of people that will convert on a target cost bid, or whatever, right? So it's like sub-segmenting that certain audience under the objective in a different way. And I've seen a lot of things like this, or people trying it, and I have not seen too much scalable success with it. But if you have a lot of data, bidding at the same audience maybe can work well. So if you have a really seasoned pixel, meaning there's a lot of data that's going through there, you're spending quite a bit of money, bidding at them differently could work, but it's still going to be pretty hard, I would think, to make that work over time. You might have some short-term gains, but I don't know if it'd be super scalable.
Yeah. John says, how much do you recommend scaling percentage-wise? I think he's referring to vertical scaling on a campaign level. So 10% every 48 to 72 hours, more than that, less than that?
Yes. Some people, it's varying levels of thing on this. Generally speaking, it's probably, I would say that the rule is it's between 10 and 30% every 72 hours but some people do this differently. So, but that's generally kind of what you're looking at when you're increasing budgets.
Let me see here. Tamara says, how do you keep track of scaling changes you make on a weekly basis with what worked best and what not, considering you have more than 4 campaigns running with at least 2 ad sets under each?
Oh, yeah. I do this. I keep a manual log, actually. I write it down. Some people actually use their ad set history or their campaign history to look back at the changes that they've made, which you can do. Other people I know will keep kind of a log of changes within like a Google Doc or something like that. So, I try not to change everything all the time, right? I mean, it's difficult, I think, but generally I'll also do naming on my convention. If it's an experimental idea, I'll have a couple experiments running and I'll put in experimental in the ad set name. So those are some of the options you have.
I saw some very big remarketing periods in your presentation, so I'm assuming durations, 180 days, whatever. He says I'm using no more than 3 to 7 days for dynamic remarketing. Is that a mistake? Is that a mistake? How do I treat people after that 3 to 7 days?
No, yeah, this is very much preference on your brand, and some of those that are larger are because the average order value of those is larger. So the consideration cycle is a lot longer. If you're an e-commerce brand and you have, let's say, a 3 or a 7 day window, that's completely fine. I think if you're looking outside of that, then if you're looking outside of, let's say, a 14 day or a 30 day, maybe you would want to try something like those that have only added something to cart and not just viewed, right? But the other thing to think about is what other things can you push to that 180-day audience that's been there but hasn't been back in a long time, maybe not even on dynamic product ads. What can you push to them in a content way that is more of a story or more about you, or what can you do to help bring them along the journey? I mean, you've paid to get them there before and they didn't convert. So what else can you tell them, right? In terms of helping them understand. So that would be kind of thing about it. But generally dynamic product ads, you're right. You want to be careful with having those be too wide as time goes on.
And also, I'd say that those using 3 to 7 day remarketing windows, it's usually because you have a big audience and you're able to do that. Because if it's a mom and pop shop with 500 visitors a month, using 3 to 7 day windows isn't going to give you much.
That's right.
So it's related a little bit to your audience size too. Let's see here. Helen says, do you have a good feel for expected cost per conversion, like newsletter sign up for the media publishing industry? I mean, I can tell you, first of all, a newsletter sign up, I think you got to do better, be a little bit more creative, because just saying subscribe to my newsletter, the cost may be pretty high because there's not much motivation to just sign up for a newsletter, as opposed to something that requires an email address in exchange for something of value. But I mean, and it also depends on, it's not just the industry, it's what's the quality of the audience that you're going after. Because I know that the cost of getting a webinar registration, for example, for me is going to be much lower than when targeting people who engage with me on a regular basis, as opposed to trying to target a lookalike audience. But I don't know, anything else to add there?
No, just that I agree.
Okay. Robert asked, when you say run it over 14 days, do you mean give the campaign an end date, or is that just in terms of monitoring and watching?
In terms of monitoring, it's a great question.
I got a couple minutes here. Leanne asked, when you talk about duplicating, do you mean duplicate it and then edit the creative? I think you were probably referring to anything, whether duplicating an ad or duplicating an ad set. You're
That's
editing something within it.
Yep, exactly.
Ed's trying to generate strategy phone calls. Any best practices that you recommend?
Ooh, interesting. Strategy phone calls. I mean, the first thing I think about is like, how are you going to actually pitch your expertise, right? That you, right? Like, so it's probably really content based. So a lot of your prospecting traffic is probably going to be landing page view or traffic, and maybe some page post engagement to try to get people in to your website to help them understand who you are. I'd use video probably because they're going to want to know who you are. They're going to want to know why they should care.
Well, I think you could also use video to teach something.
Yeah, true, right. Provide value, right?
And I think that would be a good top of the funnel, because as opposed to just going straight to trying to show why they should sign up for a strategy call with you, well, instead of a hard sales push, why don't you just show some value? And then they're like, and also nothing that they have to click on necessarily. Quick video just auto plays in their newsfeed can convince them. You can create an audience then of those people who watch that video and take them to the next step.
That's right.
All right. Well, there's still more questions. I didn't even get to the PHC. So if you didn't get your question answered and go to webinar and you feel like you still need an answer, what was your email address again, Andrew?
Yeah, just shoot me an email, Andrew@Foxwelldigital, and yeah, look forward to hearing from you.
Andrew@foxwelldigital.com. And then for all the PHC people, Andrew will get to your questions there too after we're done.
That's right.
So, anything else to add here?
No, thank you so much for all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday.
Awesome. So we'll get that replay out to you within usually 2 to 3 hours. I've got to do the whole editing and everything, get it ready. But yeah, you'll be sent an email that has your login credentials and everything in order to access it. Otherwise, remember, you got homework to do, and that just 2 days to do it. And we'll have our next lesson at the same time on Thursday.
Peace.
All right. So thanks, everybody. Till next time, do awesome things. We are out.